He's a Vice President of Research and Analytics at Sano Gaming. He's also the hospitality editor for the Vegas 7 magazine. He has a PhD in history and gaming history. He actually gets paid to do what many of us do as a hobby. He's got the coolest job, in my opinion. He's an invaluable source to our hobby, and we're welcome to have him here. Everybody, please welcome Dr. David Schwartz.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to rove around. Is everybody comfortable with that? Sure. Moving target. Let me get this out so I don't go too long. Oh, I got to get back to my timer here. There we go. Okay. So I'm talking today with you. I've spoken to the collectors before. I always love coming here because I think the folks here have a greater appreciation for the history of gambling than any other group in the world. So it's really nice to be among friends and talking here. And what I wanted to talk with you today about was some of the difficulties in doing research in the gambling history. There's a reason why there's not a ton of people who write gambling history, because it's not that easy to do. There's a lot of roadblocks, and I'll give you a couple today. Two things today that I saw on the internet. Number one, I was having a conversation on Twitter with somebody yesterday. Sheldon Adelson said that online gambling is bad. So people were attacking him and saying, well, it's a well-known fact, the quote I have, it's a well-known fact that nightclubs make more money than casinos in Las Vegas. Well, let me see. I went to a report I have on our website, which is at gaming.unlv.edu. If you like the statistical side of gaming, this is paradise. We've got a ton of stuff. And pulled up the report that said, well, yeah, in fact, 37% of revenues come from gaming and about 15% come from nightclubs. So that's not really accurate, not really such a well-known fact. But people still like to say this. They feel very emotionally about it. I think gambling is unique in this because it's very divisive. Some people love to gamble. Some people hate the fact that other people love to gamble, which to me is strange, but that's life, I guess, different people. So people feel very strongly about it. Now, the other thing is even more interesting and ties directly back into history. So if you look at Wikipedia today, anybody read Wikipedia? Yeah, okay. Look at Wikipedia today. On the front page, today's June 20th. Who can tell me what happened in 1947 on June 20th? Bugsy Siegel was murdered. So the front page of Wikipedia says, on this date in 1947, Bugsy Siegel was murdered by a mafia hitman. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that the murder was never solved. We don't know who did it. Last year, I wrote an article about a guy named Bernie Sindler who was friends with Bugsy Siegel and friends with Meyer Lansky, who had his own theory about it, who said that it was actually Virginia Hill's brother who did it. He said the brother was a sharpshooter who was growing up in the backwoods of Alabama. They could all shoot before they were, 5 years old. He was also a Marine sharpshooter. Apparently, according to him, what happened was Bugsy beat Virginia Hill up. She went away to France, which we know she was in Paris when this happened. She went away, told her brother about it. Her brother drove up. I think he was at Camp Pendleton, drove up, and a trained Marine sharpshooter, stationary target sitting 20 feet away through a pane of glass. Not that difficult. That's his theory. And he says that he told me that he asked Meyer Lansky who did it, and Meyer had no idea. And he was saying, well, it couldn't have been the mob, because if it had been, number one, they wouldn't do it because the casino was doing okay. Number two, that's not how they did it to people. The people usually just disappeared. Number three, if somebody in the mob did it and they didn't have Meyer's permission to do it, they would be in big trouble. And the fact that Meyer didn't know who did it, he told him it wasn't the mob. So it's very interesting that people will report this as a fact because it sounds like a good fact, because it makes sense. Bugsy Siegel was involved with the mob, so it makes sense that you would say a mafia hitman would kill him. Is it true, though? I mean, maybe it is true, but we certainly don't have any evidence to state it as a fact. It's a theory, because they never solved the murder. So yeah, to me that strikes me as one of the other problems with gambling history is that it's prone to embellishment and exaggeration, and in the absence of facts, the legends and myth become fact. So we have to be aware of that. I first got involved with gambling history. I'll give you a little bit of my backstory. I grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Some of my earliest memories were watching the grand old hotels getting blown up and building new casinos in Atlantic City. So I was always fascinated by casinos, and this seems really interesting because I'm growing up in this little town that's economically depressed, and all of a sudden there's a lot of money coming in and everybody has jobs, and wow, these casinos must be really neat. So when I went to grad school, I had to write a dissertation, so the question was, what do I want to write about? Well, and the question is, what hasn't been written about? And this is good and bad. If you want to write about the Civil War, you could spend 50 years and not read every book that's been written about the Civil War. I mean, there's so much material out there. The question is there really anything left to say about the Civil War? I'm not saying that it's not fascinating to read as a reader, and I'm not saying there's not interesting research to do, but is there really something new to be said? You know, we all know what happened, we all know who won, we all know why the war was fought, we all know the generals. So I didn't want to write about something like that because everything's been said. And I looked at casinos, said, well, there hasn't been a lot written about casinos. Maybe I should try researching this. As I got into writing the dissertation, I learned why there hadn't been a lot written, because there's not a ton of sources, and this is the biggest problem. Historians like really readily available sources. So if you've got a business, there's a cricket in here. Well, it's going away there. Makes it feel like we're around a camplight. Anybody got marshmallows? We can get a fire and telling old ghost stories of Bugsy Siegel. So historians really like it. If you're going to do the history of a business, they like having records of everything. And they like it if the owner kept a diary, and the owner kept a journal of every business meeting he or she had, and if every employee is documented. Now, this isn't how casinos are researched. So when I was doing research in the history, even of the legal casinos of Las Vegas, I ran into a lot of problems. Now, I went to do the research at special collections at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Again, and this was my experience, this was around 97, 98. I would drive up from LA, hit the Silverton Buffet, which I think was $2.99 for breakfast then. That would pretty much be my food for the day. And then spend all day in there just going through boxes of stuff. And I'm going to talk more about this stuff. But just an example of something that you might not expect to find. I found the papers, a collection of papers from a man named Charles Hirsch, who was very far from a household name, but a fascinating person. Charles Hirsch was the accountant for the Golden Nugget for about 30 years. And then he was the accountant for the Sands for about 10 years after that, 5 to 10 years after that. And he not only kept documents of what he was doing, although some people allege that he kept 2 sets of books when he was at the Golden Nugget. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. And certainly we can't hold that against him because he wouldn't be the only person doing that. But he also went around the country giving speeches about how gambling wasn't that bad, especially after he started working for Howard Hughes at the Sands. He was one of the people that Hughes brought in as an accountant there. He would go around the country giving these speeches about how gambling really wasn't that awful. So he's a fascinating guy, and he left his papers. So using stuff like that, I was able to piece together a good history of how casinos grew in the Strip. And to me, this was important because before you would read, when I was reading other people's work, they would talk about the Flamingo opening as a casino in Vegas in 1946, and then the Mirage opening as a casino in Vegas in 1989, and they never really made a difference between the two. And well, yeah, the Flamingo had, 100 rooms, 200 rooms when it opened, was really small scale. The Mirage had 3,000, and so my dissertation was charting that transformation. And when I went on the academic job market, I came into the other big problem with writing gambling history, and that is that it's pretty far out of the mainstream. There's not a lot of people who cover this, and this is positive because it means there's a lot of great work to be done. It's negative if you are trying to get a job in a history department because they like stuff that they can put you in a little box and say, you do this. You do 19th century women's history. You do 20th century labor history. They like that. Gambling, it's not big enough. And again, if you want to go, pretty much, I think we could learn the movements of every single general in the Civil War and every day of the war. So if we want to know where General Meade was on October 10th, 1862, we could find that out. So there's a ton of material. Gambling, there's not a lot of material. It's very far out of the mainstream. As a result, publishing houses tend not to support books about gambling. Having just self-published a book about gambling, I have an idea why. They're not great sellers. So there's not that support that you would get for a book about even something like World War II would have a lot of support. As a result, there's not a lot of what historians call secondary scholarship, which is other secondary sources, which is other people writing about the primary sources, the stuff that happens, so other people writing about it. So there's not that guide that you can get. There's a little bit, but not a lot. And the problem goes back to the lack of documentation, which is pretty big for the legal casinos in Nevada, but is even worse for the illegal casinos. For reasons that are manifestly clear to all of us here, because we're intelligent people, and we know that if you're running an illegal business, the last thing you want to do is have meticulous records. Okay. Unfortunately, some historians and people like that they can't seem to figure that out. Well, why don't they have records? Well, it means they weren't running a real business if there's no records. No, it was a real business. It just didn't have records. You try managing a casino, that's a business. So it was a real business. It's a business without those kinds of records. Another kind of interesting thing, kind of the case in point about why if you're involved in a legal operation you don't have records. I forget the guy's name, but this came out in the straw man investigation. So when they were investigating the Kansas City mob in the 70s, the bag man who was going back and forth to Vegas kept meticulous records of all of his expenses because he wanted to prove to his bosses in the mob, and it's not a dumb thing because the Kansas City mob guys were pretty rough characters, he wanted to prove to them that he wasn't stealing money from them. So every time he made a phone call, he would document it and say, well, this is a personal call, well, this is a business call. When he took his wife out to dinner, he would separate that out from the cost of his hotel room because they were covering the cost of the hotel room, but because the dinner was a personal dinner, not that. As a result, when the FBI raided the place, they had tons of records of all the movement of money, which was pretty dumb. So that's how they get you. So that's kind of why you don't see a lot of that. The other problem is that there's not a lot of sources. There's not a lot of places to go to find this. There's very few research libraries in the world that have specific gambling collections that would be useful to somebody looking into the history of legal casinos, again, much less illegal ones, so you don't have that same thing. If I wanted to do the history of film, let's say movies, UCLA has a great collection. There's all kinds of collections all over the country and all over the world documenting the movie industry, so that's there. Okay. The other problem, this is the third problem, is the fact that the sources that do exist are often conflict. So one source might say that an illegal casino was open at this time, another might have a different story. And it tends to be kind of fragmentary, and we don't know who to trust. Right? So that is another difficulty. So the question is, if it's so difficult, why bother doing it if it's so tough? To me, the answer is that it's something that we feel passionately about and something we enjoy doing. Just like Kennedy said, we don't do these things because they're easy. We do them because they're hard. If we just wanted to do, if we were just buffs in military history and wanted to recreate the Battle of Gettysburg, I respect the people who do it, but it's been done so many times that it doesn't really take a lot of effort in some ways. But trying to dig up the history of an illegal casino, in Ohio in the 1930s, that's tough, and you have to really dig. So to me, it's the challenge that's there. And when you learn something new, you're not just learning it new for yourself, it's something new for the whole community. Everybody's gonna gain when you learn, because it's still growing like that. So I want to talk about some good sources that I found, and then I'll open it up to questions if anybody has any other good sources they've found. The number one good source that's more available these days than it used to be is newspaper archives, which are now available more and more online. And they're very helpful because now, especially with being able to search them online, you put in the name of somebody. So let's say you have a chip from an illegal casino, you find out the name of the operator, you plug them in, and you can see, at the very least, usually their obituary, but often they'll come up with, some information if they got arrested, or you see the other stuff they did. This was really helpful to me, not for an illegal casino, but for the Flamingo, because there is a lot of debate about Bugsy Siegel's real role and Billy Wilkerson's real role, and I'm pretty sure we all know that story. But looking at the LA Times archives, I was able to kind of retrace Billy Wilkerson's steps, and he really was the important person that his son's book says he was. When he opened a nightclub in LA, he got all of the producers and studio owners and all of the big stars of Hollywood to come out and pay fealty to him. So it's very interesting using these kinds of sources. So newspapers are good. The downside of newspapers is that sometimes they're not available online. The best example is the historic Las Vegas Review-Journal and Las Vegas Sun, which are not available online. But if you're in Las Vegas, the State Historical Museum, which is now at the Springs Preserve, has an index. So you can look up the index and look for the person you're looking for. So that's one benefit there, way to get around that negative aspect. Another good thing, if you want to do more in-depth research, is court records, which are possible to get. I got some of these. I actually got a whole trial for another book I'm writing that will be out later this year about Jay Sarno, the guy who built Caesar's Palace and Circus Circus. I'd read that he had been on trial for offering this huge bribe to an IRS agent. And kind of in all the official histories of Jay Sarno in Las Vegas, this was really downplayed. And nobody really said a lot about it. So I went back, although Oscar Goodman has a couple of good anecdotes because Oscar Goodman represented Jay. So I went back and got the actual original transcript of the whole trial. I think it cost me $50 to get it, something like that. They delivered it to the federal courthouse here, so I had to go down there and sit in there and go through it page by page. It was pretty long. But I learned some really interesting things. And then kind of cross-checking dates with that to the newspaper records, I was able to see this was really a big deal. When Sarno and his partner, Stan Mallon, they weren't acquitted, but they did got off on the charges, it was like above the fold, World War III type. Sarno goes free. So kind of I rediscovered that this was a huge trial. This was a real big deal in the 70s. And it tied in with the federal government investigating the casino industry and the IRS starting to tax dealers' tips and all kinds of other fun stuff. So the court records are pretty good too. You've got to know what you're looking for, but they are pretty good. And for illegal casinos as well, you can find some interesting things there. The other good source, and we're getting more and more of this, is oral histories. So oral histories are basically interviews that are done by academic type researchers. It's not like an interview in a newspaper where they're shooting for something very specific. It's pretty big and wide ranging. And there are a lot of these that were done with the pioneers of gaming. One of the best ones, well, actually I'll give you two really good ones. One of them was Bill Harrah, and the other was Benny Binion. And they're both really good. And we've got them both, and they're both available online. So you can kind of cross-check things. And there's also a lot of ones from lesser-known people. There's ones from people who weren't owners. They were just dealers, and they talk about going around to the different casinos in the illegal circuit. So it's really good. And I think that's something that's really expanding. So oral histories are good. The other one is biographies. Some of the people in the casino business have written biographies, and as it becomes easier to publish, more and more people are doing this. So you'll see people writing about their time in casinos, and you can always get little hints from these, even kind of throwaway stuff. So I find that fascinating. Another really good source for the state of Nevada is the Harvey Fuller Notes, which we luckily have a copy of at UNLV. And I know Sheldon and I have been talking about this for years. I would love to see more people using this because it's such a great resource. And I think if we get one person looking at it every year, and it's usually Sheldon, that's a busy year for those notes. So this is just fantastic. This was in the late 70s and 80s. He went around Nevada, did meticulous research. You've probably heard about the keynote tickets that it's written on. A lot of it's written on. I saw one of them on eBay the other day. So somebody apparently has some of them and are selling them off. We've got copies of everything, so it's all in one place. And it's just a tremendous resource for Nevada casinos. It's fantastic, incredibly detailed. So that's another really good source. And there's a lot of other sources in special collections that I think are helpful to people. One of them is the photograph collection. We've got about 70,000 photographs, mostly of Southern Nevada, some other places too, though, and this can be very helpful. The other is the manuscripts collection. Now, manuscripts are basically rare and unique materials. They're not books, they're things like collections of papers. The Hirsch collection that I talked about at the beginning was a manuscript collection. It was just his papers. We just got, this is a really neat collection, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell you, we just got the papers of Dennis Gomes, who was originally an agent with the Gaming Control Board. He was involved with the investigation of Spilatro and Rosenthal and all that, was involved with getting them out of the gaming industry here, and then became a casino executive and ran several casinos before buying resorts, and he passed away last year. So it's very interesting. We have his papers. I believe they're sealed because we have his audits of casinos where they found skimming going on. So I think it's still sealed to protect the people who are still around for a few more years, but some of that's available, and we have a lot of these, and there's some really good stuff. We also have casino collections. So a couple good examples. One of them is the Stardust. When the Stardust closed, their PR director basically gave us his entire office. So we have all the marketing materials. So if you're interested, if you find a lanyard for something, advertising an event, or you've got a special chip, that's in here. You can go back and find it at the Stardust. So there's some really good stuff in the Stardust collection. Sands collection is another great collection from that casino. We've got a ton of really good stuff there. So that's another great source of the manuscript collections. Now the big question I have is what needs to be done for casinos. Because of my job, I get a lot of questions that I don't have answers to, but it would be good to have answers to. And one project I would like to do would be to work in getting a form of the Fuller Notes available to people online that would at least make research for Nevada casinos that much easier. So you would know the date it opened, you would know the dates of the big partners, you would know all that kind of stuff. To me, that would be really helpful. Another thing is just getting more detailed information about the illegal casinos, in a way that's accessible to people. So people know, just general ideas of how many were there, where were they, when did they close, when did they open, that kind of stuff, to me would be really helpful, getting more about that out there. And that's as far as sources go. So number one, we need better quality sources out there for the public to use, including collectors, for everybody to use. Number two is I think people need to start writing more books about this, because there's a lot of really neat stuff here. And with self-publishing, the cost of producing books has fallen so low, it's possible for a lot of people to go into this. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stories out here still to be told. So I think that's pretty much it. Another thing that I'd like to now put back on my hat as director of the Center for Gaming Research at UNLV, if you have documents, materials about gambling history of any kind, not just in Las Vegas, pretty much everywhere, consider donating it to special collections. We'll make very good use of it. It'll be in a climate-controlled area. It will be accessible to people. It will be available to scholars. It'll be available to collectors. It'll be available to anybody who wants to come in and look at it. It's probably one of the most rewarding things in my job. It is a pretty cool job. Probably the most rewarding thing is to talk to somebody who spent their life doing research in an area and gathering information and telling them, yes, this is going to be here for generations, and people will use what work so hard to collect, people are going to continue to use and find value in. So that's my last little plea there, and I will now open it up to questions. Yes?
You're mentioning casinos.
Yeah.
And when I think of casinos like the small ones, or the small as the El Cortez, to as large as the Bellagio, the Venetian, and so forth.
Yeah.
And then you're talking about illegal casinos.
Yeah.
I have no idea of, and then the chippers are saying, "Oh, I collect illegal chips."
Yeah.
And I'm saying, well, how could these casinos be illegal when they could be easily, apprehended or something? What range of illegal casinos are there?
Good question. How could the casinos be illegal and be so well established to have chips and things like that? There's two different things. One of them is we have a nightclub, and in the back of the nightclub, there's a door. Behind the door, we've got a little casino with a couple of crap tables, a roulette table, and a blackjack table. So that's one of them. And for something like that, you are going to have chips. My own specialty as an Atlantic City native is Atlantic City, and there were a couple of them there. 500 Club is probably the best known one of those. The other one is a situation where, you've got, for example, Edward Bradley's casino in Palm Beach. I think it was the Palm Beach Club down in Florida, which pretty much ran openly because the police were on the payroll. So you pay off the judge, you pay off the mayor, you pay off the chief of police, that lets it run openly. And before 1950 or so, that situation was pretty common, especially in places like Florida, where you had a lot of tourists coming. They didn't mind it so much. After 1950 in the Kefauver Committee, they started to crack down on that, which is why a lot of people ended up moving to Vegas. This is why Mo Dalitz, instead of investing in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and Covington, Kentucky, decides to build the Desert Inn, because they're starting to clamp down on him there, and he wants to go legit. So that's part of what happens. So yeah, it's a very good question. Basically, it's the same thing, the same way that you could have bootlegging in the 20s. Everybody knew what was going on, but people were being paid off, or they were kind of hiding it a little bit. Other questions? Yes?
Do you have sources or contacts in the gaming administration in the state that you can influence them to make sure the data that you need gets collected at the government level?
I have contacts. I don't know how much influence I have with them, and this is really interesting. The way, anybody here from the Gaming Control Board? All right, good. The way they collect information is not great, and the way, we could have so much, not even historical, but just for present day. So for example, in New Jersey, the information is broken down by casino, so we know, and by machine type and everything. In Nevada, it's all aggregated. So the question I had is, well, now that we have online poker being legal here, can we find out, are we going to know the revenues? And the answer is no, because there's only one operator, and they only break it out when it's more than 6 operators. It's going to be aggregated with everything else. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but because that's the way they've always done it, that's the way they do it. They really, pretty much they developed the way of doing this back in the 70s, and they're still doing it pretty much the same way. So yeah, I wish I could. I'd like to get better data, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Instead what I try to do is reverse engineer it, so you can go, publicly traded companies have filings with the SEC that you can kind of break down and work from. So that's what, that's second best. Second best. Other questions? Yes? I'm not sure what happened to the evidence. The hearings are congressional, so they're very well documented. I don't know what happened to the evidence.
I saw references in records or photographs.
Huh. That's a good question. I'm going to have to look into that and see. Yes?
David, a couple small tips.
Yeah.
One would be that the deeds, the county deeds are also available. They're not online yet.
Yeah.
For Clark County. But one thing you can find out, for example, researching the El Cortez, there's a lot of information there just in the deeds that has not been published. For example, one of the original owners of the El Cortez was an internationally known cellist.
Huh.
And his wife.
Yeah.
because of legislation. Turns out there is another clerk, and that's buried in the county building as opposed to the Justice Center, and that's the clerk of the county commission.
Ah,
And there, the records are available of all the early, which were able to establish that in fact it was the Red Rooster,
huh,
not the Paradise. They got the first gaming license of what would become the license.
really?
Strip. But it's very cumbersome. And they
Yeah.
got one of the old machines from, I think, 1940 that says the record on a box that you gotta put in, it's $1 a copy.
Wow.
But the stuff is there. You just gotta, I think everybody in this room, I would mention, say is not afraid to dig into records, but this one would take some digging.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll just kind of throw, that reminded me of something. So I also did some research now at the Clark County Recorder's Office, and I was looking at Jay Sarno when I was writing that book, and his partner had said, well, the reason why we sold Caesar's Palace was because we found out Jerry Zarowitz was involved with the mob. He was the guy who was running the casino, was not licensed to run the casino, but nobody was going to tell him not to run it. You know, we found out he was involved with the mob, so we wanted to get away from him because he scared us. I'm like, that makes sense. Then I was doing some research, and apparently in 1971, which is 2 years after they sold it, Sarno and Zarowitz partnered in buying a piece of land. It's the land that eventually became what was the Continental, then Terribles, and is now the Silver Sevens. So it's very interesting. Looking at that, you can kind of piece it together. Also piecing together is real exciting for me. Piecing together Kirk Kerkorian's first, you know, when he bought the piece of land that Caesars was built on, which I think he bought it in 1962, and they started building it in 64. So it's kind of neat. So the Recorder's Office and then the county records are another really good example. Another fun thing, at Special Collections, we have the minute book of the City Commission. So we've got the minutes of the hearings where they gave out the gaming licenses, and that's really neat. You know, you can see in 1931, they legalized, the governor signed it in March. First week in April, they're having a meeting and they're giving out licenses. So imagine today with online poker, you know, in December 2011, they say we're going to have it, and the commission has passed the regulations, and then finally in April 2013, they finally go live. So it's kind of funny, yeah.
If the general public wants to look into what's in special collections, is there like an index of what you have requested?
Yeah, so the question is how the general public gets into special collections. There's two ways. Number one is the library catalog, which has some of the material we have, especially things like books. The other is we have a searchable database online of all the manuscript collections and all the photograph collections and oral histories. So you could put in, you know, Red Rooster, and then it would turn up every collection, every oral history, and everything like that has a Red Rooster, and that's all available online. Just look for UNLV Special Collections. So yeah, it's very accessible, and I think it's something that it would be nice to have more collectors in there. Again, especially for those resources and the fuller notes, which I'd love to get more use out of. Yes.
Is there any type of a movement to do more qualitative interviews with everyone before everyone dies off? I mean,
Yeah, this is actually a project I'm involved with the El Cortez that I hope to use as the model. What I'm doing is I'm interviewing people at the El Cortez, doing a series of oral history interviews, probably going to be about 20 or 30 by the time we're done. Hopefully I'll get them edited and put them out as a book. And I'm hoping that this gets other casinos to look and say, hey, look, this is valuable, you can do this. And the rationale is that it is a valuable history. El Cortez, the Epstein family has been great to work with because they realize it, they get it, that their history is a positive thing, not a negative thing, so it's good to start with them. But I think we're going to be doing more of that. Hopefully I can get the El Cortez project finished and be able to show people that, yeah, this works. But that's a really good question, and we do want to do more of that. Other questions? Yes.
Are there good land use records for like the strip and those kinds of things?
Yeah.
Because some of these properties are in massive multiple lots and portions of other people's property and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've heard rumors of people being paid millions literally for a place to put a sign.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got, you know, probably the best thing for the owners is the recorder's office and the deeds and that kind of thing. But we've got good land score maps going back pretty far, so you can see when things were built. Yeah, the aerial maps, so you can see when they were built, and they're the Landescore maps. So that's also pretty helpful. Yes.
Is there copyright issues or something with Florida? Is there any way that somebody can reprint them so that, you know, you don't have to go look at it?
Yeah,
Actually,
that's one of the things that we're looking into. You know, we would definitely be interested in doing that. I'd like to be able to put it, you know, kind of my optimal thing would be able to put it online for free or close to free, and also have a printed copy that wouldn't be that expensive. So that's, you know, that's a really good question. You know, we got our copy with the donation of stuff from Harvey's Casino. So, and it's a big question, you know, does that mean we the copyright? You know, we definitely can let you look at it. Could we authorize somebody to print it? No. You know, on one hand, it was, and now I'm totally going out on a limb here, I believe it was done as a work for hire for Harvey Gross, so I don't think that Harvey Fuller's estate has the copyright to it, but I could be wrong. So it's, yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know the answer. I'd like to look, and the issue with it is it's not just a kind of thing where you can just scan it in and put it up there. We need somebody to sit down and retype it, which is incredibly time consuming, you know. And I'm thinking maybe we could get some kind of Nevada Humanities grant. I mean, the problem is you can't go to a national granting agency and say, we want to get, you know, $100,000 to make it easier for chip collectors to find casino chip hits. I mean, you know, if we wanted to document, you know, whatever, migrant workers doing whatever, you know, they would love that. But like that kind of stuff, it doesn't really excite the federal granting bodies. But I'm thinking maybe the Nevada Humanities Council might be able, because it is a valuable part of our history. Yeah, if we had interns, that would be good. But yeah, no, it's and then you also do get what you pay for. So it might be, yeah, you know, that's definitely a project I'd like to do. I'd like to make that available to everybody so you don't have to go down there. For now, though, you've got that thrill of discovery and just knowing that you're one of the only people seeing it. But yeah, hopefully we can do that. And that's a good project. That's one of the many projects we have. You know, I've got the oral history projects. I've got a couple of book projects that we want to do there. And that is another good one that I'd like to do. Yes? Yeah, it's the second edition of Roll the Bones, The History of Gambling, which I just did. It's available on Amazon. It's available pretty much everywhere online. You can find it. And it was, originally it was published by Gotham Books. They let the copyright, they let the rights go back to me. So I figured, well, I can sit here and cry about it, that my book's out of print, or I can invest some of my own money in it and do it. So I invested my own money in it. And, you know, yeah, you realize there's a reason why they let me get the rights back. But it's like, hey, it's a gamble. And you gotta, it's just all about breaking even. Yeah. No grad students, unfortunately, you know. Yeah, not a ton of, UNLV doesn't have a lot of people who study gambling history for whatever reason. They don't seem to really encourage it too much. It's a shame because it's one of the areas, supposedly with the governor and everything, we're supposed to be the intellectual hub and everything. And I think it's a fascinating business. If you look nationally at the business, gambling is growing so much, we could really be at the forefront of something, but they just don't seem to like it so much. Yeah, you know, the hospitality people do what they do, which tends not to be more the historical stuff. So yeah, it's interesting, but we've got a lot of good materials. I mean, there's plenty of books remaining to be written, yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the bug murder, kind of piqued my interest. How much belief do you put into that theory?
Yeah,
Are you researching?
Well, it's hard because, I mean, to date, I think there's been something like a dozen people who have either done a deathbed confession that they were the shooter or have their theory, so it's kind of hard. The guy who told me about, the guy whose theory it is, his name is Bernie Sindler. He told me the story about how he met Meyer Lansky. It was a kid who grew up in Baltimore, and they sent him down to Florida because he had asthma, and he met Meyer Lansky on the train, and he started working for Meyer Lansky there, and he had been pretty much a card mechanic and was doing card tricks for Meyer Lansky's friends, and then Meyer hired him to work in one of his clubs because he was so good at it. And then when the Flamingo opened, Meyer sent him out here, so we worked with Bugsy and knew all the people. So yeah, it seems, I would say maybe 75 to 80%. It seems to make sense. You know, I'm sure somebody else could tell a story, another story that seemed to make sense. To me personally, it makes a lot more sense than the mob killing him, because that's just not how they worked so much, and I don't see what they would gain by killing him, because it just doesn't seem that's how they worked. And according to Bernie, who knew them both, Meyer really did love Bugsy, so I don't know that he would give the order to do that if he did. So yeah, and the other ways just seem so convenient. This is kind of trickier, yeah. I'll have to talk to him. Yeah, it's interesting though, because you know, again, this is an unsolved murder from what, almost 60 years ago, almost 70 years ago. You know, so yeah, I don't think we're ever going to know, but there's a lot of theories. But the Sindler's theory makes a lot of sense to me. He did know both. He did know all the people involved, which is more than I can say for myself. So yeah, I put some validity in it. Yes. No, I guess we'd have to go back to the original police investigation. I have no idea what, you know, now we're in the Beverly Hills Police Department and what evidence they kept, which I don't know. But it would be interesting to look at their files and see if it, you know, see what it supported. Yeah.
Yeah, I got two questions. One is, do you have any plans for graduate students and giving fellowships to come in and study this?
Well, because we're in the library, we don't really have graduate students. You know, we can have student workers, and that's a possibility to have a student worker there, but they'd have to be in another program at the university, not a department, no. You know, that would be in the history department. I don't know if you tell them I want to study the history of gambling, I don't know what your odds of getting accepted. I know at least one person said that and they didn't accept him. So, and he wanted me to help, and I'm like, well, I can't really help with them, yeah.
The collection, how do you get there to see them?
Basically, we're in the third floor Lead Library. How many people here have been there? Got a couple.
And one thing, I was disappointed in
Uh-huh.
when I went in, I wanted to look at the collection, and the librarian there said what you wanted to look at.
Yeah.
And that was the reason I asked what's online.
Yeah.
You need to ask for a specific thing. It's not a library that you go in and browse.
Yeah.
So you have to have a list of what you wanted, and mine was Dove. And so I just came up with Fuller Index.
Yeah.
And they
Oh, yeah.
pointed out that they were very nice, but you need to do your homework.
Yeah.
To get there, because it's a little room with nothing.
Yeah. You know, we've got a big room in the back with all the books, but they're closed. Yeah, they're closed stacks, so you can't. Part of the reason for that is that a lot of this stuff disappears. I mean, like my gambling stuff gets stolen more than anything else in the library, so that's one of the reasons why it's closed stacks. But yeah, do the research online. Go online, look at the catalog if you're looking for books. Look at the manuscript collection search box if you're looking for that stuff. And yeah, you could do really well. Yeah.
And then the last question
Yeah.
on this is that, you said that you have for other jurisdictions. My particular area is Saratoga, New York.
Okay.
Is there information available?
I don't know what we have for that. I would start. We do have a subscription to the New York Times online going back to, I think, 1840. So I would start with that. I think we may have a Harper's Magazine article about Saratoga Springs in there. We have a couple books about it, but not a lot of the original documents because they're lost. But we do have some books. Yeah.
The Saratoga Library has a large collection.
Yeah. So that's a good source for that, too. Other questions? Yes.
Do the students that are at UNLV in the various gaming directions, they're being,
Yeah.
Going to work with casinos?
Yeah.
Do you get to guest lecture before them to get them to appreciate?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Not all the time, though, but sometimes, yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah.
I have probably 4 questions. The first one is corporate casinos. Does somebody keep records of that, or annual reports?
Yeah, the annual reports, we have the old ones, the new ones are online, but we have links to all of that. They do, we have the records of Harrah's Entertainment, which is now Caesars Entertainment. We have a lot of, basically the way we got the Harrah's collection is, it was sitting in a warehouse in Memphis, and when they moved the office from Memphis to Las Vegas, they decided to close the warehouse and they gave us all the stuff. And this is a real cool thing. It's a lot of pictures of Bill Harrah with celebrities, and we've got some really great things. One of the best ones is we've got a book with all the business cards of everybody in the organization. So if you go back to 1970, you can find who the slot host was at Lake Tahoe. It's really cool. So we've got some really good ones. MGM, we officially have an agreement to have their collections, but they haven't given us a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Another question. When I first came to Las Vegas, half the strip wasn't Las Vegas. It was Winchester, I think Winchester.
And Paradise, yeah.
Right. When did that change? And
Well, there's still Winchester and Paradise. It's still not in the city.
they still exist?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 That's actually the name of my self-publishing company is Winchester Books, because it's named after that, yeah.
The other question is, the Golden Gate account started in 1906, is that right?
Yes.
Was it illegal to 1930?
It wasn't. It was a hotel. And then I think in 1931 is when they added, Bob might know this better than me, in 1931 I think they added the gambling then, but it was the Sal Segev, and then later it became, I think in 1952 it became the Golden Gate when the owners from San Francisco came down.
Fourth question.
Yeah.
If somebody in the room knows, I'm interested in the Golden Bank Club that burnt in 1961 in Reno.
Huh.
Also, the Historical Society in Reno was very helpful, and
Oh.
also the University of Nevada there.
Yeah.
That's what what I'm kind of researching now.
UNR also has some really good materials for Reno, too. Okay, other questions? Yes?
Dave, don't be too modest. The book that Dave's talking about, the second edition of Golden Bones, is literally the history of gambling from time immemorial down through Casino de Monte Carlo and on and on and on. So if you're a student of gaming, get his book because you start at the beginning of time almost
Yeah.
in terms of gambling.
Yeah.
You go right through the present.
Yeah.
Why didn't you bring
Oversight. And I didn't, because, I didn't ask permission first. I didn't want to just pull up, vendors, pay to sell stuff. So I didn't just want to come with stuff to sell, yeah.
your other book is on something Xanadu?
Yeah, Suburban Xanadu. That's, okay, this is a whole, yeah, that is. I wish the publisher would, it's $50 for a paperback or so. I wish they would make it a little bit less expensive. I haven't seen a royalty check from them for about 10 years, so don't blame me. So I wish they would reissue that at a lower price point, or ebook. Yeah, I wrote them a letter asking them to, and they won't do it. I'm like, well, just let it. Obviously, you're not printing new copies if you're charging $50 a copy, and you're not selling a lot of copies, so let me have it, and they wouldn't. So it's a shame. That's a shame. But Roll the Bones: A History of Gambling Casino Edition is the new one that's pretty good. And then hopefully later this year I'll have the Jay Sarno book out. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I'll be around if you have questions. Thank you.